Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. Welcome to Rising. I'm back. Ryan's back. We're here. It's great to be here.
Great to see you, Kim. How you doing?
I am great. Ryan, great to have you back. So we have a great show for everybody today. Ryan, what do we have?
Well, we've got friend of the show, Zed Jelani. He's joining us to discuss the end of the eviction moratorium that expired Saturday at midnight. We've got Philip Wegman. He's weighing in on D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser's busy weekend following mask mandates. And special guest Kim Kelly is going to give an update on the miners' strike in Alabama. But first, we wanted to discuss how China and Australia and the U.S. are responding to the Delta variant. So both China and Australia are imposing stricter restrictions, where in China, the country says that 200 cases have been linked to the Delta variant. The country has put more than 1 million people under lockdown and has reinstated mass testing campaigns.
In Australia, Brisbane and parts of Queensland state entered a lockdown Saturday after 6 new Delta cases were confirmed. Australia has been notoriously strict throughout the pandemic on quarantining travelers coming into the country for 14 days with no outside contact at all. Interesting.
Sure, yeah. I mean, do you buy these China numbers, Kim? What do you think?
You know, I used to not buy China's numbers. It just seemed really odd to me that the rest of the world had the virus circulating around, seemed to be really unable to get it under control. And China, miraculously, was the only country that somehow had it under control. But actually now I'm starting to believe their numbers. And the reason is because we do see other examples of really strict border control lockdowns actually somewhat working. I mean, even in Australia, even though now they're having a bit more of a surge of the virus, it is still nothing compared to where what other countries have experienced. So I do think there is something to locking down the borders. I think that might be the only way to actually control the virus. Do you trust their numbers? I get the sense you don't.
I don't trust any government's numbers, really. But Australia, has this tiny vaccination rate, and so they've gone aggressively with lockdowns. You know, if you follow the coverage of Australia, they're still contact tracing. You know, they can trace a particular outbreak in a particular area to one 17-year-old kid who got it, and then. And started spreading it. I guess in China, in Henan province recently, there was this massive flood. And there were images on social media, I don't know if you saw these, of the subway was flooding. Absolutely terrifying image. Imagine being in the subway and the water's up to your neck. This 4-kilometer long tunnel just flooded in like 5 minutes. People were getting flooded in the bottom of parking garages, and the government said, yeah, it appears that 30 people died and 9 are missing. 30? Like a 4-kilometer long tunnel filled up in 5 minutes and just 30 people died, plus the subway flooded. They're now saying that maybe as many as 300 died. So when you have a situation where it goes from 30 to 300, I always assume that it's significantly higher than that. But maybe these the brutal kind of lockdowns that in Australia and China are implementing actually do work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably, it seems to make sense to me logically that if you just shut down and you don't allow the virus in, then you wouldn't have any spread. But you'd have to ensure that you can absolutely keep it out of your borders. But, China, but I understand. I mean, China's one to not necessarily trust because they do control their narratives quite a bit. And one of the reasons why they control the narratives in times of disaster and in times of virus, anything sort of like this, is to control panic, right? They have a lot of people, 1.4 billion people. And so they're they're notorious for trying to control panic. And they do this when it's people uprising, protests to natural disasters. So I understand. Really, when it comes to China, we have to be skeptical. And like you said, any government that gives us any information, we have to kind of question it a bit. And certainly China is one to question. But I don't know. I do wonder if the harsh lockdown is the way to go. And now I don't know what happens after that. You can only lock down for so long. Right. So then what?
Right.
You ultimately have to open up.
Right. The question then becomes, is the vaccine that they've produced effective? And I guess we'll learn over the next few weeks and months if it is. And here in the U.S., Dr. Anthony Fauci warns that the increase in Delta cases may only get worse.
John, I don't think we're going to see lockdowns. I think we have enough of the percentage of people in the country, not enough to crush the outbreak, but I believe enough to not allow us to get into the situation we were in last winter. But things are going to get worse. If you look at the acceleration of the number of cases, the 7-day average has gone up substantially. You know, what we really need to do, John, we say it over and over again, and it's the truth. We have 100 million people in this country who are eligible to be vaccinated, who are not getting vaccinated. We are seeing an outbreak of the unvaccinated. There's some breakthrough infections among vaccinated. You expect that because no vaccine is 100% effective. But in the breakthrough infections, they are mostly mild or without symptoms, whereas the unvaccinated, who have a much, much, much greater chance of getting infected in the first place, are the ones that are vulnerable to getting severe illness that might lead to hospitalization and, in some cases, deaths.
So according to the CDC, even if you are fully vaxxed, your risk of infection is lower, but you can still potentially spread the virus. They note that breakthrough cases for vaccinated people tend to be less serious. And Kim, I want to try out a hopefully maybe optimistic take that I have on you. So in the UK and in South Africa, when this variant was ripping through, you saw it surge, but then you also saw it kind of rapidly diminish. California may have seen something a little bit similar. When you have a virus that is as contagious as this one is, perhaps on the upside, it can burn itself out pretty quickly, and we might see ourselves on the other end of this new wave sooner than we think. Or do you think I'm just being way too optimistic there?
Well, I mean, certainly that's a possibility. I mean, anything with this virus is a possibility, and I think we should always keep that mentality with us. I mean, I think one of the reasons why people are no longer really trusting Fauci and the CDC and why they're having so many, why we're seeing so much backlash to the CDC's new mask mandates is because they keep making these sort of definitive statements like this is what's going to happen if you do X, Y, Z, and then that doesn't really happen. I mean, it seems to happen for a moment, and then suddenly the next thing you know, oh no, it isn't really actually the case. I mean, they were saying even just a week or two ago that if you get vaccinated, you won't get the virus. That was something Joe Biden was saying. And now the CDC and Fauci comes out and says, well, actually, if you do get vaccinated, there is a chance that you will get the virus, these breakthrough infections. But then, you know what? In a couple of weeks, they're going to have to come out and say, actually, if you're vaccinated, you still very well can get the virus and it can spread just as much as anybody else, because we're already seeing that data coming out of Israel, for example, and other countries that are heavily vaccinated with the vaccines, the same vaccines we're using here in the U.S. We saw that earlier with other countries, but they weren't using our vaccine, right? They were using China's vaccine. So people were saying, oh, no, that was just the crap vaccine. But, you know, there's anything is possible. We can hope that this virus spreads quickly, that it's not as deadly. We don't know. The data is unclear at this point whether or not the Delta variant is deadlier. It could be, it might not be, it might be the same, it might be less. We don't really know. Hopefully it does burn itself out. But then again, then we sound like Trump, right? Who says it's going to go away by Easter.
Right, for sure. But the data are still pretty impressive when it comes to vaccinations. I think there's been something in the U.S. like 6,000 plus breakthrough cases out of 100 plus million people who've been vaccinated. Among those 6,000, something like 1,000, 1,200 have been hospitalized and died. So that's a lot of people if you look at it kind of in the aggregate. 1,000 people, that's horrifying. But compared to millions, it winds up being like a 99.999% success rate for the vaccine. I'm curious, just to kind of anecdotally in your own social circle, what I'm hearing from people who I know is that I do know several people now who've gotten breakthrough cases, but it was like a cold. They felt bad. They were better like two days later. It's terrifying. You lose your sense of taste, and what's terrifying about it is that you don't know where it's headed, because you don't. There's no guarantee at the outset. Don't worry, this will just be a 2-day head cold, and you're going to be fine by Wednesday. You can't tell people that. There's 99.99% chance that that's going to be the case. But on the other hand, you had a 99% chance of not getting it. So all of a sudden, these numbers aren't so reassuring to you, because there is that, that very tiny chance that
Right.
that something horrifying could happen to you, but it's such a more minuscule chance than just walking across the street to try to catch a bus without looking.
Well, I don't know. We don't really know the rate of spread with this thing because they're not testing people. They're not testing everybody. So right now, if you are fully vaccinated, they're only testing you if you request to be tested or if you're showing symptoms and you need to show up to the hospital, and then in which case they'll test you. But otherwise, they're not. So we don't really actually know the rate of spread. I know that in my inner circle, there are people that are fully vaccinated. They're now getting COVID. It is terrifying, but, I knew a lot of people who got COVID well before the vaccine was around, and most of them, it was just a head cold or absolutely no symptoms whatsoever, or mild, extremely mild symptoms, like they just lost their sense of taste and smell, and that was it. And then it came back after a few days. So, it's hard to tell how much effect anything is really having, I think. But I think the data is actually pretty clear at this point from everything I've been able to look at just around the world in the United States, that the vaccine, for especially the people who are high risk, does seem to definitely mitigate the symptoms and help them stay alive and safe. And so, something to really consider. Senator Bernie Sanders urged people to get vaccinated on Twitter, noting how low the number was of vaccinated people infected that led to hospitalization and death. To be specific, CNN reported that less than 0.004 fully vaccinated people had a breakthrough case that landed them in the hospital, and less than 0.001 cases for fully vaccinated people resulted in death. So, it seems to be working, especially if you're in that high risk category.
Right, and that's a key point. Over the weekend, the CDC confirmed 74% of people involved in a Massachusetts COVID outbreak were fully vaccinated, with 4 of them ending up in the hospital. The new data also found that vaccinated people who get infected carry as much of the virus in their nose as unvaccinated people, leading to the updated mask recommendation. And then when you dig a little bit deeper into those numbers, you find that, like you said, people 65 and over make up roughly 3/4 of these breakthrough infections that end up having serious consequences for people. So we're back to what we knew in the very beginning about this pandemic, that if you are 65 and over, you're in the risk category. But if you're vaccinated, it's a risk category, but it's down at the 0.001 level.
Well, it seems to mitigate it. We are seeing some little bit of alarm coming out of Israel and also that Massachusetts outbreak, where I believe 75% of the hospitalized were fully vaccinated. But, it's still anything that's going to reduce your risk of death. You have to weigh your odds, right? And if you're older, or if you're in a high risk category of some kind, you got to do what you got to do to protect yourself. You got to be smart about this. So what's the best way to urge more Americans to take the jab? As Ken Klippenstein notes, people would be more inclined to get the shot if it were required for flying rather than receiving $100. That is what I've found in my personal circles. People are not getting the vaccine because they are actually afraid of getting sick. They're getting the vaccine because they say, I just want to be able to travel. I want to be able to go to concerts. It's kind of interesting.
FOMO, nothing drives people like FOMO. And speaking of missing out, I think if you also mandated that somebody be given 2 days off work after they got vaccinated, I think you would get a significant number of people who would take the vaccine at that point, because there are a lot of people who are like, they've heard about the side effects and they don't want to do 2 days worth of work with 102-degree fever, and they don't want to lose their jobs for just for getting a vaccine. But Kim, thank you so much for being here today, and we will tell you what's on our radars next.